It was a push for independence that's descended into conflict. Voters in northern Iraq overwhelmingly backed a referendum to form their own state. But the Iraqi Prime Minister had other plans. After multiple warnings, Iraq's central government has launched a major offensive to retake areas of Kirkuk, and the advance has been swift. Within a day, residents say troops loyal to Baghdad have entered the city after seizing an airport, oil fields, and nearby industrial towns. Multiple casualties have been reported. It's a big twist in Iraq's ongoing war. Just a year ago, both sides were working together when they launched a joint operation to take back Mosul from Daesh. Well, to talk about this more, I'm joined from Baghdad by retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He used to be the U.S. military spokesman in Iraq. Also from Baghdad, Ali Ad-Dabbar. He's a former Iraqi government spokesman. And in Washington, D.C., Paul Davis. He's a retired military intelligence analyst. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ali Dabbar, if I can begin with you, sir. I understand that Baghdad wants to teach the KRG a lesson. It was unhappy with the referendum, but things are very ugly on the ground in Kirkuk right now. Isn't Baghdad risking a full-blown civil war by this intervention?
I don't think so. Haider al-Abadi trying to be very careful in dealing with this, and it is a redeployment of the military forces and the police and the federal police force, and definitely the situation in Kirkuk and the behavior of the governor as well as the Kurdish authority, which they took over Kirkuk and give it a Kurdish color, which is definitely this is against constitution, plus pumping the oil and taking over the oil fields and the airport and down the flag of the federal government. This is all it is against the law and against constitution, although that the federal government, they had a full patience not to take any step and not to undermine their effort to fight ISIS. But again, the behavior of the governor as well as the Kurdish didn't allow Abadi to stop. But again, there is less clashes. I think now the Iraqi military forces, they succeeded in capturing the airport as well as the governorate office, and they are raising the flag there, and the oil field as well. And they are moving without that much clashes between the Iraqi forces and Peshmerga.
Paul Davis, who's in the wrong here?
Well, we want to talk about the situation on the ground and how it evolved. And I hear that we talk about this is an unconstitutional move on the part of the KRG and that the Kirkuk is a federal area. However, we go back to the initial establishment of the new Iraq and Article 140 of the...
Well, we seem to have lost Paul Davis for the moment. We'll try and get him back. Let me bring in Mark Kimmitt here. Mark Kimmitt, the fact that U.S. weapons are involved on both sides of this, does that worry you?
I think the United States is on both sides. I heard a little bit of what Colonel Davis was saying, and I can tell him that the situation looks very, very different on the ground. There really are no significant challenges here on a constitutional basis. While Colonel Davis was quoting Article 140, Article 1 of the Constitution says that Iraq will remain a free and unified country, and any change to that has to be done with a 2/3 parliamentary majority, which has not happened. So I think what we need to do is everybody at this point needs to calm down. The United States is trying to mediate on both sides. They're trying to make this, as you say, not a civil war. We need to remain focused on ISIS. We need to remain focused on pushing ISIS out of the country. Anything that diverts from that is fundamentally unhelpful. So I would hope that both the government in Baghdad and the government, the KRG regional government in Erbil can come to a quick agreement so we can get back to the major issue at hand, which is the defeat of ISIS.
Ali Dabbar, would you agree that the longer this continues, all the different players are taking their eye off the ISIS ball and Daesh will only be strengthened and emerge or re-emerge in the vacuum?
Well, always the vacuum of power allows and give a chance to ISIS to come again. But I think that as Kemet said, that it is not so hard, the situation in Kirkuk. The federal government is taking over without any that major challenges. I think that the Kurdish regional government, they do need to understand that they cannot continue on this violation. The clause 140, I would just want to add, the clause 140 didn't allow the Kurdish to dominate and to take over Kirkuk. It is a joint administration. I just remind you that earlier the United States was also a third party, which also helping in keeping the peace there in Kirkuk. But unfortunately, due to emerge of ISIS in Mosul, the KRG, they took over everything, and then they pumped the oil and they took the revenue without even in the revenue went to the Kurdish people in the KRG. So the clause 140, I think it is a constitutional clause and need to be implemented, but you do need to keep peace on the ground in order to have the census and to have also to make proper referendum, not a referendum which gives the question that whether Kirkuki people, they want to join the KRG in separation from Iraq. This is a big violation in the constitution.
Okay, I'm glad to inform you that Paul Davis is back, and I'm going to allow you to finish your point where you used Article 40 as a justification for the referendum. Go ahead.
And basically, that's what we're talking about, the constitutional requirements that the Baghdad government was supposed to have a referendum 10 years ago, and it has not. What happened with the KRG, the referendum, was not an enforcement of an independence. All it was a non-binding referendum on a free and fair election with an intent to continue negotiations. When you have tanks rolling through your street, you are not showing good faith that you intend to have a continuing negotiation. This is an enforcement by dictatorship.
But Paul, in retrospect, was it maybe not a good idea for them to include Kirkuk on the ballot? Because Kirkuk is a disputed area. Now that they have tanks rolling in, should they not have included it?
But now we go back to Article 140 as to what's supposed to not be a disputed territory. Had that referendum happened anywhere between now and the last 10 years, there would have been a different situation. The concept of disputed territories was supposed to have been settled, like I said, 10 years ago.
Ali Dabakh?
Yes, I don't think we cannot justify that the clause is not being implemented. Kirkuk was unstable during the past 10 years, and there is no way to perform this clause, definitely. And the Kurds, they know very well that it was not as easy, even not possible, to have the consensus in that governorate. And even the election was so hard to perform it because it was unstable. And by anyway, even not implementation of the clause didn't allow the Kurd to take over the Kirkuk, and Masoud Barzani was always declaring that Kirkuk is part of Kurdistan. I remember, I just give an example, in 2005 when we draft the constitution, Masoud Barzani had sent us a message, and he said, look, two wars were to take Kirkuk. We are ready to make the third war and not to allow Arab to take Kirkuk. Kirkuk is a fully Kurdish region, and this was a message to us in the Constitution Drafting Committee. And so there was a plan to take over Kirkuk, whether there is a 140 clause has been implemented or not. As you know, during the past 13, 14 years, the authority there on the ground, they tried to give the Kirkuk a Kurdish color. They tried to change the demography of Kirkuk by doing many things. And you could ask anyone in Kirkuk, whether Arab or Turkoman or Christian, you could know that how could they took a measure in order to change the color of the city.
Understood. Let me bring in Paul Davis here. Paul Davis, you didn't just have Baghdad, but you had all the neighboring countries. You had the entire international community saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do this referendum. They went ahead anyway. Yes, 93% of those who voted yes, but it was seen as illegal and nobody wanted it to happen. not Baghdad and not the international community. Is the KRG now just facing the consequences? This is why everybody was saying don't do it. And might it now lose everything? Might it now lose even the autonomy that it had beforehand?
Not now, not now, not now is something that has been said by the Kurds for a fiddly number of years. The international community was opposed to this referendum. We're talking about any type of discussion with Kurdish continued expanded federalism or independence. This is a historic situation that itself in. The world was opposed to the breakup of Yugoslavia. The world was opposed to the breakup of Czechoslovakia. The world was opposed to the breakup of the Soviet Union. And then the world is opposed to the breakup of Iraq. Iraq is a failed state, and it needs to be readdressed. If not now, when?
Okay.
Everybody said yes.
Okay, so let's take that and pose it to Mark Kimmett. Mark Kimmett, from where you sit in Baghdad, are you sitting in a failed state?
Well, I certainly don't see that here in Baghdad. The fact is that while it is an imperfect democracy at this point, the fact remains it is a democracy. The prime minister is selected by a freely elected parliament. It is practicing the nascent form, the beginning forms of democracy. I see that Baghdad and Iraq has put a very good force in the field with international support, and is the only country, to my knowledge, that has actually evicted the major forces of ISIS out of its country. Sure, Iraq has a long way to go, but to suggest that it's a failed state, that's the kind of rhetoric we hear from people that haven't been in Iraq for a very long period of time.
Let me ask Ali Dabbagh about weapons. I asked Mark Kimmett earlier on about, how he felt about U.S. weapons being on both sides here. Ali Dabbagh, your prime minister has said that the KRG is using PKK fighters and PKK weapons. Now, when we look at Iraq and Syria, there are many striking differences, but then there are also some extremely sharp parallels. Turkey says the SDF or PYD or YPG is connected to the PKK, and there's that sort of kissing point. Are we seeing the same happening now in Iraq? And if so, your prime minister has said it, where's the evidence?
Unfortunately, they are playing with the fire. I mean, if you could see that Haidar al-Abadi in his release in a press today, he said that there is a regional militias from outside Kirkuk. They had a flow in mass numbers to Kirkuk. He was referring to the PKK. And this is, again, we had warned Masoud in 2008 that he will be in confrontation with Turkey if he keeps supporting the PKK. Murad Qaralan had come in an interview declaring in Erbil something a few days back. Well, this is not a good message. At the end, Iraqi military forces, whether PKK is there in Kirkuk or they are calling them to defend Kirkuk, Iraqi military forces is going forward to reimpose the federal constitution on Kirkuk as it should be. And I don't think that, again, I want to comment. We have difficulties definitely in Iraq, but we cannot. It is unfair to say Iraq is a failed state. Iraq is facing and Iraq is fighting against the on behalf of United States, on behalf of many nations on ISIS, and definitely Iraq had succeeded, and huge stories of success we had achieved in the victory against ISIS. This should be appreciated, not to nominate Iraq as a failed state.
Let me ask this to Mark Kimmett. If Barzani has enlisted the support of the PKK, is that a massive mistake?
Well, let's be very clear. The PKK is a declared terrorist organization of the United States. Having said that, I don't know for a fact whether they have enlisted the support. Look, let's again pull back from the rhetoric. Let's pull back from the KRG talking points and focus on what's important here. What's important is that the country remains unified, fights a common enemy, together works towards developing an imperfect democracy into a perfect democracy, which it will never achieve, but it can only get better from where it is right now. The United States remains committed to both sides. I've been in Erbil in the past 6 weeks. I've been into Baghdad. for that same period of time. The fact remains is we have friends on both sides. We are disappointed that this can't be achieved, a level of reconciliation can be achieved in the near term. That's why the United States will continue to support both sides to promote dialogue. This fighting between these two partners just simply takes away from the real fight, and that's the fight against ISIS and other external forces that are affecting the stability inside of Iraq.
Ali Dabbagh, why is Baghdad sending the president, Fuad Massoum? No disrespect to the man, but he doesn't have the power of the prime minister. Why is Baghdad sending the president to meet with Barzani and Soleimania? Why doesn't Abadi go himself?
Well, I think that the president is he is the protecting the constitution, and he is representing all Iraqis. And I think what he is doing is good, and you do need somebody to mediate. And we would prefer, now with all respect to what the United States is doing, but an Iraqi mediation is much better, and which make, especially that Fuad Massoum is a Kurdish, and he is, till now, he is behave as he is an Iraqi citizen in not taking a side from any way. And this will allow him to mediate carefully. Now, dialogue is very important. I think that it is a time for everybody to calm down and to not to allow to ignite a fire again in the region. And I think the government of Iraq, as Abadi said, that definitely he's calling for dialogue, and he do need to meet. This all is a preparation. I think it could help in meeting both men in order to find ways to perform what is needed to protect both Kurdish people as well as the Arabs. And all they are Iraqis, definitely, that the government, the federal government, is responsible to protect the Kurdish people as well. I hope, and everybody hope, that this could not, because we don't want to have the back history of wars between us and the Kurd. It was a very blood history. We don't want to repeat it again.
Mark Emmett, Ali Dabbagh seems extremely confident that the fighting will die down and the central government will stabilize the situation in Kirkuk. But the reports I've been reading in the hours leading up to this discussion only seem to show that the fighting was escalating. What's your view on that? Is it getting worse or better?
Well, first of all, I've seen no evidence that the situation is escalating in terms of violence on the ground. It is clear that forces are moving in both directions, some advancing, some withdrawing. But any reports that there has been large-scale military conflict between the two. So I remain hopeful that in the next few days the situation will resolve itself on the ground. Most importantly, that situation resolving itself will be at an absolute minimum amount of violence, and certainly we can hope for no loss of life.
Okay, Mark Emmett, Ali Dabbagh, and Paul Davis, and we apologize for the choppy Skype connection that Paul Davis had. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. I thank you for joining us once again.